I'd like to welcome you all at the Warsaw School of Economics. My name is Maciej Onoszko. I work at the regional office of the International Monetary Fund here in Warsaw. We are just about to begin the seminar, but before we do, I would like to give you a quick rundown of the event's agenda. We are going to hear opening remarks from Pro-Rector Jacek Prokop and Deputy Finance Minister Jurand. After that, we have two presentations. The first from the IMF's Assistant Director at the European Department, Stephan Danninger. He's going to present our latest regional economic outlook. And after that, we have Marek Wąsiński from the Polish Economic Institute with a presentation of their report on the EU's single market. The two speakers will then be joined here on stage by SGH Professor Eliza Przeździecka and Minister Drop for a panel discussion that will be moderated by Piotr Skolimowski from Bloomberg. We're going to finish off with a Q&A session after the panel discussion. So thank you all. I hope you enjoy the speeches and the presentations and the panel discussion. I will now hand the floor over to the rector and the minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, colleagues, students and friends, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to everyone gathered here today at SGH Warsaw School of Economics. It is an honor to host this significant event where we will delve into the latest insights from the International Monetary Fund's Regional Economic Outlook for Europe. We are especially honored to welcome our esteemed guest from the IMF, Mr. Stephan Danninger, whose expertise and perspectives are immense value. Let's give a hand. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the International Monetary Fund for collaborating with us on this event, partially in the framework of our project on building cities through expert network financed by NAVA, the National Agency for Academic Exchange. This partnership is a proof of our shared commitment to advancing economic knowledge and fostering dialogue that can lead to actionable insights and positive change. I'm also pleased to welcome Mr. Marek Wąsiński of the Polish Economic Institute, who will present a report, The Single Market Amid the Storm. Welcome. It is also my privilege to welcome Deputy Finance Minister Jurand. We are truly privileged to have with us a distinguished group of economists, policymakers, scholars, and students who have come together to discuss and reflect upon the economic trends and challenges facing Europe today. Your presence underscores the importance of these reports and the crucial role that economic analysis plays in shaping our understanding and strategies for the future. At SGH Warsaw School of Economics, we pride ourselves on being in the forefront of economic education and research. Hosting this event aligns perfectly with our mission to foster rigorous academic inquiry and to engage with the global economic community. Today's discussions promise to be both enlightening and thought-provoking, offering a comprehensive view of the current economic landscape in Europe, including key trends, risks, and policy recommendations. Once again, welcome to SGH Warsaw School of Economics. Thank you for being here with us and for your continued dedication to the field of economics. We are all looking forward to the presentations and to the fruitful discussions ahead. Thank you.
Dear Rector, dear fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, I'm very honored to be here at academia. Actually, I perceive myself as coming out of Polish academia. I worked 5 years at the Krakow University of Economics, at the Department for Macroeconomics. So we perceived, well, we in the Krakow University of Economics, we also perceived as a serious competitor to SGH. But yes, a competitor at different times. But yes, it was always, an honor to go to Warsaw, to take part in seminars, to cooperate with professors. So it reminds me like 20 years ago when I would come here quite often. I arrived after working at the university, I worked in Brussels for a few years, and I arrived here 5 months ago. And actually, it's the first seminar of such type at SGH. And I would like to start with thanking the IMF and the SGH for organizing this conference. Or rather workshop, to discuss the outlook for Europe with a particular focus on Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe, as the specialization of this branch of IMF is. The EU economy actually lost momentum in 2023, and the Polish economy as well. We know that the growth last year was just slightly above zero, so 0.2% of GDP. But actually, the whole European economy shows relative economic resilience, and the job creation hasn't lost its momentum. But the impact of Russia's aggression on Ukraine and the weakening of global trade made their marks. This year, the situation is improving, and we will hear about this, and we'll discuss this. And the robust labor market, together with further easing of inflationary pressures, will support consumption growth, especially in Poland, additionally to the wage increases in the public sector, as you know, our first steps when we were starting the government term. And they expect easing of financing conditions and continues or starting disbursement of the next generation EU funds, normally called RF in Brussels or KPO in Poland. These will support investment, especially public investment. The new Polish government, which I have the honor to represent, has come to power at a difficult time with many simultaneous domestic and global challenges. In order to maintain the growth momentum and ensure long-term sustainable development, we need to invest in the green and digital transition, what we call in Brussels the twin transition, digital and green. We also need to reorient our educational system and the labor market in general to adjust to the demand for skills in the third decade of 21st century and in the latter part of 21st century. Part of this burden will be financed by the EU funds, recently unblocked and made available to Poland. These funds provide financial support for both investment and reforms, and actually is in the logic of the RRF, it's that investment is tied to reforms. So And these reforms should address bottlenecks to lasting and sustainable growth, while investment projects aiming at decarbonizing the Polish economy, accelerating the digital transition, and strengthening the economic and social resilience in general. As a government, we're also prioritizing investment in education, human capital, innovation, which are all key for any economy that wants to succeed in the modern world. We want to increase the participation of women in the labor market, which is a particular facet of the Polish labor market, so the low participation rate. It's something where we see the potential for, and we should tap into this pool. Moreover, improving the productivity and competitiveness of Poland and Europe in general is prerequisite to our firms to better compete in global markets, and especially in the European market. And you know that nearshoring has been in the press and in the minds of many people involved in analyzing competitiveness in Europe. So it's something where Poland sees its opportunities. Against this background, it is vital to recognize that Russia's unjustified war against Ukraine is the single most important contributor to instability and risk in the region, and has significant impact on the global and European economy. Russia's aggression has changed the geopolitical and economic situation worldwide, with all the negative consequences for many countries, for Poland in particular. And in some sectors it's more acute, in some sectors less, but it's the problem these days. And you also may have heard many times the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, talking about this. And this is not only about security, it's also about economy. Due to these heightened security risks, we need to invest heavily in defense capabilities. This can have positive spillover effects for industry in general and European economy as a whole, but this is also a heavy but necessary burden for public finance. And this year alone, Poland will spend about 4.1% of GDP on defense, and depending on how you count, you may come up with higher figures. And this is for sure both declared and true goal of the actions we take in the government. So to strengthen up our defense and to lower the risks through it. This is a considerable effort for us, but by funding it, we are helping to strengthen our security and European security as well in general. Last but not least, as many of you know, Poland will hold the presidency in the Council of the European Union in the first half of next year. For me personally, it will be another adventure. I served at the Polish embassy or permanent representation to the EU 13 and a half years ago. And this is, I both remember and I also foresee for the next year, a major challenge for the public administration. The priorities I mentioned here are also our priorities for the presidency. We need to make the EU more competitive. We need to boost growth and productivity. We need to manage the transition, especially the energy transition. And above all, we need to ensure stability and security. So we will devote resources, political, administrative resources next year. We started preparing it, of course, as soon as it was possible in December. And we are getting ready to it. But the presidency is a tool for making Europe going in the direction we would like to. So to be more resilient, both economically and politically, and in defense as well. So this session is about economy, but what I may say it's a major difference from my times in academia 20, 25 years ago. It's exactly this part of security and defense. At that time, you know, at the beginning of the century, everything looked simple. The path ahead of us looked straight, leading to prosperity. And after 25 years, we see prosperity, but we also see the risks for this prosperity. So there's a difference, but I'm still in the business of macroeconomics, economic policy, and I'm looking forward to discussions at our panel on these matters. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Feedback. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Prorector Prokop, the School of Economics and the SGH for this invitation, and of course, the nice welcoming words from Minister Drop. So afternoon will be a bit of a journey. You see the airplane on the back, and that's the title of the presentation. The one part is about soft landing in Crosswinds. That's the theme that I'd like you to take back with you. Europe is on the process of landing softly, bringing inflation down without disrupting growth too much. But it could be shaken in crosswinds. So if you look at these YouTube videos when these big planes land, sometimes you see them wobble, and that's the image that we have in mind. Usually when you land, you want to go somewhere, and that's the second part of the presentation. That's about towards a lasting recovery. And that actually turns out to be the more difficult one. Even though you would think landing a plane is difficult, the lasting recovery, because of those challenges, including new defense spending, climate change, is something that Europe is struggling or will be struggling with. So let's go into the soft landing piece. This is what we call the baseline forecast, or a main forecast. First word is Europe actually is quite resilient. Where we came from 2 years ago, start of a war, before that the end of the pandemic, it could have been much worse. So despite the low growth numbers now, one needs to put that in context. Across Europe, experiences are also quite different. Countries that benefit from tourism, for example, doing quite well. The Baltics, which is very, very close here, has been much more exposed to the cutoff of supply chains, so they're not doing as well. Manufacturing sector, intensive countries, Germany, they were sort of in the middle and recovering now. You see all that on the left-hand side with the chart called PMI, Purchasing Managers Index. So those managers that purchase for businesses supplies or orders, they reported an increase since the beginning of this year, and it's across all sectors: services, manufacturing, and the composite. So that's the good news. And that gives us comfort that the recovery is on track. At the same time, we see that inflation, which was in double digits, has come down quite far. And that's the table on the right side that tells you that inflation this and next year is expected to come down. That's an unusual constellation in the sense that usually it takes quite a long time for inflation to come down once it's elevated and at a much higher economic cost. So this is maybe surprising at the beginning. What are the two factors why we think that this can happen? One is you had an energy price shock, and the response through policies has been quite incredible. So there are now alternative supplies than for natural gas other than Russia or even more renewable energy sources that are coming online. Second, the policy intervention was quite effective. So this is where the landing seems to be quite straight on the face of it. What does it mean in terms of growth? Europe growing 1.6 and then 2% this year, next year. The euro area is 0.8 and 1.5. These are not great numbers, but given where we are, they're good numbers. And the CESE region, so this is the Central Eastern and Southeastern European, growing faster at 2.5 and 3.2%. Let me go to the crosswinds. What does need to happen for this plane to land without being moved around? So there are a number of assumptions where we hope that things go right, but and we think we see the indications, but it's not clear. First, the good thing is unemployment rate is very, very low, but it needs to, the labor market needs to cool. If it doesn't cool, there's going to be too much wage pressure and the decline in inflation will not take place. But if it cools too much, you don't have sufficient domestic demand for the recovery that's very tenuous to take place. So what do we see? I think first, so far so good. On the left-hand side, you have unemployment, the vacancies rate over unemployment. So if there are lots of vacancies, it's quite a tight labor market. We'll see it's coming down both in the advanced economies in Europe as well as in the CESE region. So that's a good sign. What will be the outcome if it goes right? The incomes of households should be rising because even though wages are no longer growing as fast, prices come down, so your real purchasing power is going up, so you can again purchase things with your income, and employment is not eroding, so that also helps consumption. And we see that the real incomes are really picking up. So that's a good sign. So that seems to be going right, and that's number one. The second part is, while there was a lot of support for the economy last year, now it's being withdrawn. In Poland, you have the energy price support measures that will be phased out, but that's happening in many other countries. The fiscal balance is improving, and that's what you see on the left-hand side. The blue part is the average improvement in the fiscal spending, less of a deficit. The orange one is for CESE countries, less ambitious. Growth needs to be strong enough to overcome this headwind. So that's the second part that needs to go right. And then the third part is investment eventually should pick up because the economy is not just depending on consumption, it depends on investment, which drives the economy. And that's what our country-by-country desks assume, that the red line, the capital formation, that's investment, is going to pick up. The NGU funds that you mentioned is one source, I think, that's going to help. But lo and behold, you need businesses to decide they're comfortable with both the financial conditions. So if inflation goes down, interest rates go down. That's the one element. And the other element is that security is in place because uncertainty is often a pace. So that's the precariousness that we're in. Where do we end up? Well, that's a repeat from the beginning. It's growth with price stability, and that's what we show on the left side. That's the unfolding of growth with the different components, first for the advanced economies and for the CESI economies on the right three panel, on the right bars. And lo and behold, at the same time, inflation is coming down for both. So that's the description. What I want you to pay attention to is that for this to happen, the wage growth needs to actually slow. So this is a line, the red line is the forecast of how wages in the CESI region need to evolve in order for this balance to take place. If, as I said, wages growing too fast, you have more inflation. If they grow too little, you might not have the demand boost. We see that the forecast for the region in 2025 is between 5 and 7% for this to happen. Poland is on the high end with what's consistent, but this has to come down in order for this to happen. And this is our first concern, where the plane may be a little bit wobbly in that inflation could actually be higher than what we would expect, because wages are not cooling down as fast as we hope. So that's about the plane coming down. I'm going to switch to, did I go too fast? So what helps us bring that recovery into a safe haven? And here's where macro policies matter. The typical three ones are monetary policy, fiscal policy, and of course, stability. We look at financial sector stability. So how well Europe will fare depends on how well they will be able to bring down inflation. So the left-hand side depicts the momentum of how much inflation already has come down. So the red lines are the goods, the red lines are the services in red, and the goods are in the dotted lines across countries. What you see is that services have shot up quite a bit and are coming down, but keep a little bit higher. And that is the reason there is because they're labor intensive. And as a result, central banks watch very carefully of this indication whether price stability can be achieved in the near term. The differences in wage increases are quite dramatic across Europe, and so needs to be the monetary policy. So what applies to Poland may not apply to the Czech Republic or Hungary, but what the common theme is that in all of them, wage pressures leading into inflation is elevated. So what that means is that the monetary policy easing that we expect to happen needs to be adjusted to the underlying inflationary forces. So one of those central banks on the right-hand side is the euro area, which is like the one everybody watches very closely. Applying that concept of thinking, we expected and recommended the ECB cuts rates by 25 basis points in June, and another 2 cuts this year, and then further ones in 2025. That would be consistent with inflation coming down. For CESI economies, because of the higher wage pressure on inflation, we expect that they will and should keep the monetary policy stance tight for longer. And the rationale is that one should err on the side of caution, be rather tighter for longer, even if inflation comes down, than being surprised and being wrong the other way. So the cost benefit is much better than easing too early. So that's on monetary policy. A word on the financial sector. So 5 years of shocks has created business risks to businesses. And now that interest rates have risen and financial conditions tightened, we expect, and I think everybody else in this room who would look at policy would expect, that the ratio of non-performing loans, that's the credit outstanding that banks give loans for, is increasing. In other words, that there are more bankruptcies or more restructuring needs in an economy. And that's not a worrying sign, that just comes with the cycle. What we look at is the financial sector healthy enough to weather this change? And in many banks across Europe, capital ratios are clearly above minimal regulatory thresholds. But one needs to worry about if that economy goes slower, the European economy, because of some of these crosswinds, can banks still weather the shock of then rising further bad loans? Here, what can policymakers do? And I think this is something that I think Poland and others do quite well, is be very prudent on how banks distribute profits. Profits should be preserved, and should be preserved in order to prepare for the potential of rising NPL, and then when the recovery comes, that they can still supply credit for banks, for investors who need funds. One can also increase countercyclical capital buffers. This is it depends on the case-by-case situation, with countries having to study their own situations, but these buffers then should be released in case the economy goes well. Particular risks are from the housing or from the property price sector. You see the declining prices. So far, they have declined to a degree that is expected, but should the decline be larger, or should it start accelerating, one would have to be carefully reassess and monitor the situation, and that's what supervisors should be doing right now. And the final part is turning to fiscal policy. Two charts here. So Europe has responded to the shocks last year, and now it's time to take stock. Public debt has gone up, and we find ourselves in an economic environment where inflation is coming down and growth is picking up. So it seems to be the right time to adjust. And this is happening on the left-hand side. You see fiscal deficits in the blue and orange bars declining, and they're declining over some time towards these red lines. These red lines are the debt stabilizing ratios. That means once you cross them, the public debt to GDP ratio will stabilize, no longer rise, and turn around. Given how long it takes, we think it might be prudent to adjust fiscal policy by more. Particularly, it takes beyond 2028 for the CESI region as a whole to even reach that threshold. So having debt not stabilizing is a risk to stability, and it will raise financing costs over time. But it is also a risk that future spending needs will not be met. And that's on the right-hand side. So this is a first time we put such a chart together. This is the cumulative amount that countries will need to spend, not just on defense, but on aging, on health, and on climate. And if you were to be in 2050 right now, you would expect that if this holds true, that you need to spend close to 6% more in advanced economies on these different uses, and up to 8-9% in CESI. What is this? This is spending to make sure that the economy does no longer produce carbon. It's pensions that needed to be funded, and if they're not funded, you need to put the pension funding in. Poland, I looked at the data, is on the higher side of this right side, and pensions is one of the big items, including climate, that requires additional spending. So that's what's ahead of us. So now we've landed, now we go to the second part as to where we're walking now in terms of a lasting recovery. Where are we, what can we do? So, deep growth challenges await. This is a bit of a bitter pill, but I think it's one that's healthy to swallow. How does Europe compare to other advanced economies? And the US, A, for data reasons, but also because it's comparable in size and population, is a good comparator. Lo and behold, low potential growth is the Achilles heel for Europe. For example, Poland is growing 3.5%. It could grow 5 to 6%. I think that's where the ambition must be. Why? So if you compare the output per person living per capita in the US, adjust for the different bundles that people consume, so the purchasing power, you find out that Europe has 1/3 less per person that it produces in consumable products than the US. So Europe has 66% of the US. Now you will say there are two things. A, there's a choice that Europe makes. We work less and we like to have a more balanced work-life balance. That maybe is one reason, and the other one is like, well, it's probably hidden in there that the Germanys and France, they're all doing well, but there's like the lower income countries, maybe they're really having the gap. So let's go about second one. Even Germany, even France, all the higher income countries, except Luxembourg and Ireland for technical reasons, they're all lower than the US in per capita. And the second part is this difference due to labor that we choose to work fewer hours? And it's a resounding no. It's not because Europe works less. In fact, what you see in the middle, it's the same gap. Now we decompose it into the contribution from labor, which is the yellow one, K, which is from capital, that's the stock of investment, and the residual is what you do with it, how productive you are. Labor makes a difference, but maybe 20% of it, of that gap. The big part is the orange element. It's money left at the table. With the same amount of capital and labor, you're about still 20%, 30% less output per capita. That's what sort of the competitiveness, productivity, a lack of being able to compete discussion is about. And if you look on the right-hand side, let's do this is for the EU. Just look at the CESI, which is the subgroup. The gray bar is much larger. That's the underinvestment. That's K not being as high as in other countries. And that's like capital stock that may be outdated. If you would replace and invest it, you would not only bring up the capital stock, you probably also bring some new technology on board. So that's why the gap is even larger for CESI economies. So one more point of digging slightly deeper. So now I've hopefully convinced you that, okay, we could be like the US if we produce with the same K&L more output. Now, who is the one who's not being productive here? And this table makes sort of a nice comparison by showing 3 types of sectors: high productive, middle productive, and low productive, and see how much they contribute to output in the US, in the EU without CESI, without the Eastern, and in the Eastern part. In the US, 44% of the output is produced by high productive firms. By high productive, you can read, we look at how much further you're away from the mean, and if you're above in the top 40%, then we call you high productive. That's relative to the 16%, almost 4 times more. So I think partially that's the reason, but partially is also you have a way larger medium, and in the CESI, very, very large, low productive sectors. So they're not that they're not working, but there are better ways or more productive ways of doing it. So it's not just that Europe needs the high productive, it needs also less of the low productive, which can be middle productive sectors. So it's a pervasive problem. Okay, so now we get to what can be done. And lo and behold, what I try to make the point here, because you have low, medium, and high, so if you put the SESI and them together, you need to have policies that address a productivity challenge at different levels. On the one hand, getting into raising the higher element, you need larger firms probably. There's no Googles here. The Amazons of the world, they've been created in the US. If they're good ideas, they can be created in Europe, but the scaling up is not as easy. So that's one element. And the answer there is the Capital Markets Union generating the funds that there is capital for riskier investments available, things that banks don't typically do, things that usually pension funds or insurance funds do. That's one element. The second element is that within Europe, you still have barriers of trade. One is border regions. That's a very simple part. Border regions are not sufficiently well connected, and this is 20 years after some countries joined the EU, that if you were to build the infrastructure, the rail network, telecommunications, even other services, the EU could increase output by 1.4%. We have certain sectors that are not open. That's the financial services. It's the energy sector, but also, what's the third one? The telecommunications. So opening those up will create the opportunities. Example is that if you buy Amazon something, you probably have to go Amazon.Poland, I would imagine, and you don't go to Amazon.eu. So Amazon, even like a global brand, needs to have its own different websites in different countries. And when I order from Austria, it's not shipped to Germany, which is, in my case, 5 kilometers away, and vice versa. So these are these barriers that needs to be removed. And the third part is labor. Labor, of course, skilling them. I think that's one element that you very rightly said, but also allowing the labor to move where it's most productive. There's no limitation that you can go there, but it costs 8 times, I think it's 8 times as much in Europe to move from one country to another country than in the US from a state to state. So what are these costs? A language, of course, that you can't change. You need to put probably finding housing, finding transportation. It's not as easy. Licenses. So if you have a degree here, it might not translate to a degree in Germany, or you don't get the same reward. So pensions is another one. So if you pay into pensions, if you work overseas, that doesn't transfer back if you move to somewhere else. Or right. So that's the third element of our discussion of how the single market should be strengthened. There's some more details about it. The capital market, the labor market activation, trade barriers, I think we'll keep that for discussion. And I'd like to leave you now with a number of how much can be actually achieved by moving quite rigorously, and the EU has elections and there's a new commission going to be in place. What can be done? And most importantly is what can be gained while other blocs, the US and China, are subsidizing their own sectors. So what you see on the left-hand side is the gains that Europe would achieve under 3 scenarios. One is you don't do anything and the US subsidizes its own production in its local places. It's like a policy that's not that unfamiliar. Actually, Europe would gain a little bit because there will be demand created by within the US. You don't compete as much with manufacturing in the US. It's the China would suffer. And you have like a small little gain. That's the left-hand side. What now as a result if Europe retaliates? Also subsidizes its own production. There's no net benefit. You just become less efficient. You are subsidizing production in a place where it's not most efficient. It should be at the places where the costs and the technology is most available. But what if Europe were to reduce its internal costs of its own market by 10%? You can get 7% over a long term of higher output. You saw that gap, if you remember that gap, the 30% gap, that usually takes up to 80 years to close on current times. With this alone, you would get it in 40 years, make the catch up. So what's the intuition why that would help relative to the subsidies that you would also impose? And the tricky part is to understand how globally China, Europe, and the US functions. The US innovates. I think that's one element that we know. China produces, and Europe stands in the middle. And that's what the chart on the right says. You can see the US manufacturing, research and development spending is much higher. That's a measure or an indication of being innovative. China is clearly manufacturing value added is on top. It's a production hub. And Europe is somewhere in the middle. If there is a fragmented world where there are barriers built into the distribution, like the US has ideas, but then it lets them produce in China, that doesn't work. The best response for Europe is to use its advantage. We have both production capabilities and innovative ideas. And that's why this would give you a benefit of increasing output and competitiveness. So that's the summary of my presentation. Growth, we are landing, hopefully without too many crosswinds. There is one risk, and the one risk is high wage growth translating into inflation. And for that, monetary policy needs to watch out. There's a big productivity gap between Europe and the US, and it permeates different sectors. Policies that seem to be effective can't be single ones. You need to think big. So capital market, as well as the labor market, as well as producing and allowing a trade to happen within Europe. And the payoff could be quite sizable in a fragmented world. So with that, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor and pleasure to be here and during the presentation of Regional Economic Outlook. So thank you very much for all these pieces of information that we just received and the elaboration of the data that you have given us. I was asked to be a little bit smoother here than in a schedule so that we can maybe boost a little bit the discussion afterwards. So I will try to do it if Your Excellencies so agree for that. So first of all, we heard a little bit also about the competitiveness, about the issues of challenges for the European Union as well as for the Central Eastern Europe region. just shortly giving maybe a little bit broader picture, when it comes to global GDP and share in global GDP of the three big competitors, we can see that China surpassed the EU in 2020, so the EU is lagging behind here on the third place. Yep. Okay, is it better? Yep. So this is the one point that we need to see. Also, the decreasing trend when it comes to share of the US. On the other hand, when it comes to share in world exports, here no surprise as well that China is here the champion in manufacturing. But EU is on the second place. However, we can see that there is a difference when it comes to trends between the EU and the US. While the US is staying on the same level, the EU is a little bit decreasing. And one of the factors that we need to have in mind, and it's a really important one, is the differences in energy prices between the US and the EU. There is also the difference in prices between the EU and, for example, China, but the data comparison is much harder due to a lack of the data and market in China. However, when it comes to the spread between EU and the US, it's significant. Of course, we survived the energy shock after Russian invasion of Ukraine, and prices went up. And for example, when it comes to gas prices, the spread reached 79% in 2023. When it comes to electricity prices, almost 60% lower in the US than in the EU. Oil prices are more similar. It's the difference is 6%. But actually, what I would say is even more important is that it's not only the story of the energy shock post the invasion. It's also a pre-pandemic trend. And between 2015 and 2021, these differences were significant as well. In gas prices, it was 51% lower on average in the US than in the EU. And when it comes to electricity, it was almost 20%. It's a significant barrier for European Union industries when it comes to its competitiveness, especially versus the US, but also other parts in the world. I wanted also to have a look onto data on investments. So here, when it comes to greenfield investments announcements that we can see in the world and divide them between developed and developing countries, we can see that after pandemic we had the 3-year surplus when it comes to greenfield investments in manufacturing in developed countries. It happened for the first time since 20 years, so it was quite a significant change, and we can of course assess that due to several factors, but I would say that it might also be a point when it comes to where business is also seeing safe investments in these crosswinds that were mentioned, and actually in the changing political situation that we will need to also assess here. But what's very interesting is the change when it comes to the structure of developing countries that are now ahead again over developed countries after 2023. And this is that China is not the leader anymore. And these are other developing Asia countries like India, Indonesia, or Vietnam that are leading. And the interesting side note here is that Central Eastern European countries of the European Union are now receiving more announcements of greenfield investments in manufacturing than China. So this, I would say, shows also both political and economic trends that we are perceiving worldwide. Just to put Poland here on the perspective of these greenfield announcements, Poland received a record high level of such announcements last year due to two very big investments of Intel and Ionway. So that's where I'm coming from. And actually they are connected. One is connected very much to more economic and twin transition issues. Second is to political rationale. I would say. Taking away greenfield announcements, but taking into account the flow of balance of payments, here we can see that the inflow was also very high. In 2022, it was the record high. In 2023, the level decreased, but mainly due to debt flows. And the debt was paid back in 2023. And in that way, FDIs decreased. But when it comes to new equity and reinvestments, here this level is record high in Poland last year. So I mentioned policy or politics actually. Here, when it comes to international relations, we are speaking a lot about nearshoring rationale, and here I would say that idea of monitoring dependencies is very important, and we try to assume how dependent the European Union and its member states are from Chinese input into manufacturing. Here we can see that during last 5 years, between 2018 and 2022, actually the share of China's input into European manufacturing increased by 1.2 percentage points up to 3.2. When it comes to Poland, Poland is third most dependent country in European Union as well. Almost 5% of Chinese input that is coming to Polish manufacturing. So. It's not only this, it's also mentioned subsidies. We can here see that we are not in a vacuum. We, as Europe, also need to answer to what's happening in the world. And IRA was, as an example of very heated discussions in the European Union and the need for an answer. Some assumptions if Europe is lagging behind in subsidies from Bruegel showed that it's not. It's lagging a little bit when it comes to clean tech production subsidies and when it comes to electric vehicles, but still theoretically it's meeting. US and actually tripled the size of the US subsidies in electricity subsidies. But as we have seen before, it doesn't change the situation when it comes to energy prices. So European Union, European Commission thought about the answer to IRA, and there are a number of policies that were proposed. The horizontal general document here is Green Deal Industrial Plan that's encompassing different pillars of what can be done. Very shortly, I would say that there was a very ambitious plan so to think about the sovereignty fund in the European Union, so that to on the central European level finance European projects in manufacturing, so that to try to answer and compare to IRA. However, the European Union has no competence here on how effective and simple tax breaks can be offered. It's the national competence. So in the end, we find the final answer is among the strategic technologies for Europe platform, where there was some financing envisioned. I will say it in a moment. What's in the end. quite important initiatives is, for example, Critical Raw Materials Act with projects for securing supply chains in critical resources, stable monitoring of the situation. Net Zero Industrial Act is how Europe envisions, for example, skills of the labor force was mentioned. So here there are also initiatives for increasing this in green tech. I would also mention European Chips Act as an answer to the US Chips and Science Act. But here as well, when we compare the amount of the subsidies, 3.3 billion euro to almost $50 billion in the US, so you cannot compare here really these initiatives from the financial point of view. Finally, or maybe I will tell about more later about state aid. That is actually the most important one from these initiatives. But I would also like to mention the full implementation of different defense instruments. For example, we have heard about investigations into electric vehicles, and for example, when it comes to public procurement, how subsidized companies are being here monitored by the European Commission. So this is also very important issues here. I've said that there was idea of sovereignty fund, and we got left with STEP, and STEP was initially to have over 10 billion euro for new investments projects. Finally, after February agreement, it's left only with 1.5 billion euro for European Defence Fund. There are some redirections between different funds, but there's no new money for this, and actually it might be not so good to, for example, cohesion goals to change them into a different direction. So this is under further discussions. I mentioned state aid, and I believe this is the most important way that the EU decided for relaxation of the state aid regulations. And actually, it was first when it comes to post-pandemic issues, then as an answer to Russian invasion, and third issue was with an answer for green tech subsidies, and this became, when we lack the sovereign fund, the only real financial answer from the European Union how to try to respond to initiatives worldwide, like, for example, IRA in the US. And we see that this leads to huge imbalances in the European Union when it comes to the state aid. When it comes to notified state aid between March 2022 and June 2023, the 3 countries accounted for almost 80% of state aid in the European Union. When we take much less amount of real expenditures in that time, there are even a higher ratio of concentration, almost 90% by only 3 countries, Germany, Italy, and Spain was spent on state aid. So this is not only a picture of this period. Actually, also before the use of state aid was not on the same level, because the fiscal constraints also mentioned that are higher in the Central Eastern Europe are different. And in 2022, we see the difference between for example, GDP and the share of a member state in European Union GDP, and the share of state aid that was notified to European Commission. On the other hand, it's also interesting to look into state aid that was directed into research, development, and innovation, and so here we can see that this picture is about not very cohesive single market. State aid is concentrated more in advanced European economies, and for such goals of financial state aid. So here also this disequilibrated European market can be seen. Another picture is from the policies on energy, for example, how reductions of gas consumption have to be done after Russian invasion. The burden was higher in the Central Eastern European countries than in the rest of the EU. That here the spread is almost 3 percentage points. Another picture of how the central funds of the European Union work for Central Eastern Europe is, for example, the example can be the third round of the allocation of funds from Innovation Fund in 2023, when only 2 projects from Central Eastern Europe received funding. When it comes to the interesting point is that on clean tech manufacturing, none of projects came from Central Eastern Europe, and it's also being seen when it comes to the data on innovation funds, different innovation funds of the European Union. Through the years, we see that through 2004-2020, funding for Central Eastern European initiatives was almost 7 billion euro, while in other European Union countries it reached 130 billion euro. So a huge difference here, and actually it's building the issue of how the region can trust central governed initiatives in the European Union when it comes to financing in the regions. So this put the pressure, but we need to take the note that, of course, it's not only the issue of how these funds work. So we can see that Central Eastern Europe is less frequently applying for such financing. So here there is also the issue of capacity and activity of innovative entrepreneurs and academia in the region. So just shortly to conclude and go into the discussion, I would say that it's really important if we talk about efficiency of supply chains, that actually, unfortunately, we are in the world that we are post-peace dividend that worked for us, and we could have focused only on efficiency of supply chains. It's anymore this story we need to take into account as international relations and the situation here and the threats, the risks that come with it. So dependencies that need to be decreased, as well as other even hard security threats that need to be taken into account. Competition outside the EU is, of course, very important, but maintaining free competition inside is, of course, as well. So here the balance is going to be needed, and there is also there are 2 reports by 2 former Italian prime ministers. It's one has been published in April. The other one is going to be published next month. And one was trying to be focused on the single market inside. The Draghi report in June is to be more focused on this global competition. Still, we can delve also into the details of this. But for example, in latter report, there was quite interesting initiative of state aid fee if the state aid is excessive in a country. Nearshoring was also mentioned as an opportunity, and it seems so for this part of the world. And of course, there's huge homework to be done, and we heard it from all of our former speakers that innovation and productivity growth are very important, and going up on the ladder of value chain is incremental for Poland and for the Central Eastern European region. So here I will thank you, and I hope that I try to be as smooth and quick as possible.
I'll turn on the clock just in case, so we are conscious of time. And have some time, obviously, to take some questions. Let's maybe start. We had two really interesting presentations, so there is a lot to unpack, I believe. But, well, one takeaway from what Stephan was saying was that at least, you know, the problems with productivity in Europe and low potential growth doesn't have to do with the fact that people work less here. So that's reassuring. But there are other things to discuss. Right, obviously we are talking about how to improve low potential growth in Europe, and there's a need to improve productivity. And we're obviously dealing with a situation where the societies are aging, and it's obviously not a problem just for Europe. It's across the world. But when we look at the numbers, it seems like Europe is actually starting from a weaker point in that respect. So maybe if I could start from academia and ask Professor Przeździecka about. Maybe we could address that question, because, I mean, is there a silver bullet, how we could actually deal with the situation of trying to improve the economy, the productivity across Europe or in Central Eastern Europe when we have a situation of serious problem of aging?
Thank you. It's actually a very complex issue with regards to the current situation globally. The aging phenomenon is something what we should get used to, because it's not just appeared. And before we move to the elements of the solution, how to deal with that, we should have a very close focus on the reasons and how this very, very difficult point in economy in Poland, in the EU, and globally have been created. So first of all, the very first point, what we should start with, is the labor market. Labor market, which is struggling with elders and aging population, first of all. But what we see actually in the data all around the world, especially in Europe, is a relatively low unemployment rate, which actually says us that during the slowdown and the crisis, it does not lead to redundancies. So no people left their jobs because of the crisis, or just a few of them, much fewer than in the history, what we might have expected. So what business says, the cost of retaining unemployed is higher than the cost of searching them. And there is less and less available skills in the market, as the business needs in terms of the STEM group, which actually is the one of the most needed. Job protection programs, which were very well developed during the pandemic, are still somehow working in some businesses, and they are in a such a short-termism, which actually drives our reality on a daily basis. It's kind of a long-term support and a long-term approach. So it's again contrary to the expectation. And the last but not least, less working hours per week, which actually is seen in statistics quarterly in Europe. An average decrease of hour is 5. So statistically, we work 5 hours less during the quarter comparing to 2019, comparing to pre-pandemic time. You guys have mentioned a lot about those tendencies in the productivity and the difference to the US. So actually, how to raise the productivity in business, how to raise the productivity in economy more general. First, we should look at the, again, empirical evidence, what actually drove the productivity in past. What came to my mind is about the technology, first of all, and obviously the internet, how it changed us, and is it going to be the same change as AI brings to us within the next years and the near future? I dig in, like we started with academia, so I should refer to scientific research. It is said that the data and the research conducted on the basis of 108 countries in 1995 to 2010 says that internet users increased by 1% would be resulted in an increase of GDP per capita $15. So it's significant change, and it drives the product, it drives the output very significantly. Corresponding to NI and technology progress, the very key point is a gross capital formation, which actually is driven by all of these industrial policies, which actually, from my perspective, are not horizontal anymore. They are much more sectoral right now and much more focused on green economy, on the progress of that part of the business and the economy per se. And the last but not least, migration policy, which actually is a very great challenge to the EU as an institution, as a group, but it might have an impact on the labor market within the very close future, and change the labor market and availability of labor force as within the skilled and unskilled group.
Since we talk about labor market, I believe Mr. Drop mentioned increase of participation of women as one of the features and one of the important factors. If I could ask you a bit more to elaborate on that, and also try to maybe address that question of aging, which is obviously also an issue for Poland down the line.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to mention that old rules apply. So the sound economics, which underpin all our analysis. And actually, what I've seen in your presentation, and analysis from 2023, I think I could have read something of such quality in 1999 when I was drafting my MA. So, and actually the results are also similar. So competitiveness depends on capital, labor market, but total factor productivity is the key. And it stays advantage of the US over the European economy. So this is very long-term determined phenomenon. And as you ask about the labor market, as we have an economy close to full employment, the pool of labor we can tap to is those inactive. So it's actually, yes, during the last years, I was also surprised by the lack of increase of unemployment. It's markedly different from the business cycle crisis in the past. So it's something what is different from in the textbooks I would teach my students in 2000 from the textbook I could read now, is that this unemployment phenomenon, which also shows we are hedged better, but it also shows that we have a different age structure of the labor market. So what you mentioned about the future and the age issues in the future, and it was also present in your presentation, that it's a challenge for our countries, and especially for Poland till 2050, this age structure change of labor force. And indeed, the women participation rate is something which can be increased and where the reserves lie. And now, well, you can approach it from, big projects, big ideas about the women equality in pay. And if you ask me about the details, well, 2 days ago, I had implementation of one of EU directives discussed in one of committees of the Council of Ministers, like how we move forward and how quickly can we move forward with the requirements of especially the equality, gender equality. So it will be just one of steps. It will be implementation of the EU directive, and I think many of these positive changes in this particular field, so the equality in labor market, it comes from European side. And what we also see, what is driving the Polish legislation and Polish policies, it's usually the EU legislation. I was working like 5 years as Polish representative in Brussels for, digital policies. And then we were all aware it's something which will happen in Poland. So the directives we're negotiating, they would be implemented in 2000-something, in 2020, for instance. It was like 2014, and after all delays, necessary delays, unnecessary delays, and prompting by the Commission to implement it, it would be there. And well, for instance, the Network and Information Security Directive, it's what I was negotiating, and then in 2018 it was implemented. It's from outside the labor market, but it shows that the EU level prompts us, and it's why it's so important, and it was so closely analyzed by Marek.
Stephan, you show in your presentation, I think it was pretty shocking, although we're probably aware of that, how much this low productivity or low value part of the economy represents the total economy of this region, of CESI. I think I lost it. Okay. Anyway, this one works. I mean, is there a sense that maybe the time is kind of running out for this region, given that there are also aging, challenges faced by this region, and they are pretty steep. And we're starting from this situation where we really have a lot of catching up. Do you have the sense that the time is running out and it will be very difficult for those countries to catch up to the level where we want to go?
I think absolutely not. This is a region that has super lot of potential. I think on average, the skilled labor in the region is very, very high, from stems, from the science side. Institutions in many countries are strong. So we need to compare who are the competitors on a global scale. And yes, it's true that a lot of FDI went to Asia. That's also a very fast-growing population there. But I think Europe has the full potential because its market is next door. So a lot of things that can be produced here can be consumed in Europe, right? So it can be shipped to the US as well as to Asia. So that certainly is not the problem. I think my sense is that Europe is half committed. It wants a single market and it wants free trade, but to get there, you have to give up some of your inward-looking policies or thinking yourself. Take the capital market. I think you pointed out quite nicely there should be inward FDI coming to Poland, and all the European emerging markets want that the FDI comes to them. But at the same time, there is a segmented capital market, so the domestic savings, every country wants to keep it in their own countries, and that's not just Poland, that's all of them. I think one needs to take the leap and also take the step saying like, well, I think Polish firms should be, or investors should be willing, pension funds even, should be able to invest somewhere else, and other countries also in Poland. I think that's a difficult step to take, but I think one that would make sense and make it easier. So I think that it's not that far away to get those measures, but when a push comes to shove, getting consensus is very, very difficult. Common supervision, no country wants to give up supervision over their own banks, right? But it doesn't make sense that you have 25 regulatory agencies and supervisory agencies on top of the EBA. It's difficult, I know, but I think Europe does have the potential to make the change because it moved so long. So that's where it is. It's not that it's out. It's about making that leap. I think the pressure is coming from the outside now because that competition is now suddenly wasn't as strongly on the paper, on the policy debate as it was before. And for workers and labor supply, just to say is that it's not that people are not skilled, they just have, it's much more difficult to move from one location to another location where these jobs are. I think that's something that Europe could do better and could maybe for young people something that they would experience and actually even improve their life quality if they say, oh, I worked for 5 years abroad, now I'm back, I bring this experience back. So being at the university here, I think this is a very nice way of having a discussion about skilled labor and the ability to move around. I think it should be, anybody's experience should be work somewhere abroad and then bring your skills back.
I have a question to Marek because kind of on that point, you showed in your presentation how this region C applies much less when it comes to funds for R&D. I mean, have you looked in your analysis, in your research, why that might be? Why we have a situation where the West, obviously, they keep applying and R&D is sort of on a higher level. Why this is not taking place here in the C? Why we have such a big discrepancy?
There surely are several factors that we need to remember here. But if I may, just a quick answer to this. Going deeper into the single market, of course, it's the goal, very often named. For example, in the Letta report, there are several initiatives there foreseen. But on the other hand, there are risks as well. There are a lot of SMEs in Europe, and it's also a characteristic of the market. And there is a risk that more capital market union can be also a barrier for SMEs in getting the financing in these very little regional markets. And there's language barrier that is for sure as well very high for labor mobility. And the third risk is the brain drain that is very little mentioned, for example, in Letta report. He has spoken a lot about the right to stay, not to go. But in this report, we cannot read the exact recommendation how we can give this right to the people. But for sure, it's a risk that we in every country in the European Union have to assess how much we want to go into this unionization and how much we want to prioritize our own markets. So here it's a very difficult task for the pilot of the plane, actually. So when it comes to your question, these factors are actually several. One is about the potential and the lower number of, for example, people with a higher degree in STEM. So it's when we compare it, the ratio in the region in Poland than in other parts of the European Union is here the ratio is lower. Next thing that we need to take into account is also that we receive other financing from the European Union as well. And among cohesion funds, entrepreneurs and so academia can apply for financing through them. And there is a possibility that we are not applying, for example, in Horizon 20 or Horizon Europe now, because we can have access that is easier from cohesion funds. The third factor is what I just mentioned is what's easy. So the central financing from the European Union on innovation funds is very complex. The universities abroad have really huge teams that are only focused and concentrated on getting this funding. And in Poland, we do not have so much administration at the universities and in academia. Actually, maybe you can elaborate on this as well. But to get to such financing, so there are several factors. For sure, we need to focus on adjusting our education system so that we can also have a higher number of degrees in STEM. That's for sure.
Since you referred to Professor Przeździecka, maybe we could follow up a bit on this. Is it really also your experience in that sense about the the kind of the type of funding that's being applied and also the experience with education here?
Sort of, yeah. Our internal structure and the tradition of working, let's say, in academia has actually created us to be an independent, to be focused on own projects and the topics. Not so much open for the team working as well, unfortunately. But what is my experience in foreign universities is the fact that, first of all, they do have a great administrative support in that. Secondly, universities in developed countries, UK particularly is a great example of that, are working together, building a consortia, which actually drive and fostering the next ideas for projects for the next calls. We are not so sufficient in having such a networks out of Poland, particularly. We do know, as SGH, University of Economics Krakow, very well. We do operate together, but I am not so sure about such a strong cooperation out of Poland. And when we try to build such a teams, it's more on us you know what I mean. It's like if I would like to have such a first step in asking any Czechian or a Slovakian university, they do agree, but first of all, they would like to see a partners in Germany, UK, or somewhere in Western Europe. Actually, this is very complex, and fortunately, it is changing for years now. But I do believe it would be more dynamic in the near future and would build us more focused on external sources of financing of academia, of science, of education as well. We get used to have public funds from the Ministry of Science, from the government funds, but we need to open up for the external sources from the EU funds, from another sources like V4 Fund, for example, and many other organizations, as well as business. Why not? I think, and this is actually a very good sign of activities of universities, and especially technical universities in Poland. They do really cooperate and run very well-paid projects with business. So I do hope it will explore more on all the scientific part.
You mentioned the role of the government. Is that, I mean, obviously, since we have a representative from the government, I mean, what the government, this new government, you said you've been with the government for 5 months now. I know there's a lot on your plate, but since we're talking about raising productivity as an important topic and an issue, is there a space for the government to kind of get involved in that space a bit more, bringing in people together and sort of making sure there's financing, there's partnerships?
Well, it depends what you're asking about. If you're asking about precisely about academia, about what's been happening over past few years in terms of procedures, structures, institutions. So in this area, we're just making an order. We are looking back at the use and misuse of different funds, which shows the dangers of concentrating on public sourcing of funds to science, but in general to innovation. Because at some point there might be a problem with oversight on these funds, on distributing them, and again the branch of economics which concentrates on misuse, patronage, funneling the funds. This is something which shows the dangers of public funding in innovations. So, as I mentioned before, the old rules apply. From my perspective, the main role of government is to create the structures, the procedures, the ecosystem where both public and private funds can go into innovation. And I think that the last 20 or 35 years shows that these were the private companies which at some point, which used public funds at times, which used the external funding, we had it in the graph, but at some point they managed to turn into tapping their own funds into innovative solutions. So I think that public funding, and in case of Poland, it was usually the EU funds. They especially created the ways how to deal with funding innovation, and this was the main role of these funds. And then there's always a potential to accommodate the funds. So, for instance, what Marek mentioned is that, well, there are EU funds from this source and the other source. So I'm not so concerned that, you know, the R&D, we had these numbers with Poland at the very last position or somewhere there, because there were other alternative sources for funding of innovation. I think over time it will level up. And what we need to create are the structures and the systems and to deal with distortions with example of this NCBR story last year. So this we should prevent, then create the structures, and then, well, I think the human agency will play the role.
Coming back a bit to the issue of single market, because obviously one way to obtain financing is if you have a real single market. And I think that's something that Stephan actually mentioned in his presentation about like scaling up and how much, you know, we don't have companies like Google. Part of it is we don't really have developed capital markets that are regional wide as well. I mean, if you could tell us a bit more, like what is, I mean, we've been hearing about this for a very long time. I remember after every single ECB conference, there's always a line saying we need to complete single market union or banking union and so on. And it's not happening. Why it's not happening? Like what is apart from questions like language, culture, I mean, is there anything else that's sort of stopping it? And is there a way to kind of open up those markets finally and have
I think two brief observations. I think it sounds like you open a door and then, you know, the floodgates open and then capital flows around. I think one has to be realistic. It takes many years for markets to develop. It didn't come overnight in the US, and it certainly won't be in Europe. It's about the process of making it more attractive to invest anywhere in Europe without having excessive costs or excessive concerns about not being able to tap the right resources from labor and or markets. So that's number one. So what really is missing, I think the two elements of it. The one is less of national oversight on some of the investments, that capital can be deployed without having to go country by country to meeting different rules. Second is scale, so a willingness to find ways to have bigger, let's say, equity markets like stock exchanges. So there might be a scale for there should be room in Europe for one large one where, you know, the big players can. Now, countries don't want to give up their local ones, but I think there should be a larger capital market that requires a political will to agree on. It could be either through mergers, it could be all kinds of ways. So that's a second one. So that's the political will. So it takes time. It's the political will. And the third part is the skills. I think skills will take a while. I mean, those who invest need to be also sophisticated to do so. So there are lots of investment vehicles as well as investment systems outside of Europe that will have to be grown. So pension funds are very active in, as I mentioned, or insurances in other places. They are not here, and they will not be overnight being able to sort of identify where the long-run risk reward trade-off is. So that's the skills of the third one. But I think what this debate is about is in number two, like the political will to open the door a little bit further and make room for sort of a more pan-European perspective.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I'd just like to refer to this opening doors. We actually, being in the EU, are not very much involved in trade restrictions, which are increasing in all over the world. As statistics says, since 2019, the number of trade restrictions has risen 6 times. For the last year, 2 times. So being integrated within the liberalized market, let's call it single market, unions, whatever, this is the only way for countries such as Poland or other European, let's say, small economies one by one, and they're very different to each other to play together. And moreover, if I not wrong, the IMF statistics a couple of months ago says that trade within the blocks has been dropped more significantly than trade between blocks. So that's actually very, very great sign that we need to develop our ties and the single market in Europe. And in the areas which were mentioned already in the financial sector, energy sector, and the telecommunication sector, all in services which theoretically should be fully opened under the single market, right, are not, and there is a great room to liberalize them. And moreover, I would like to look at partners, trading partners to the EU, like the US. US not having any trading partner in Asia anymore, and starting the trade war with China. For the last couple of years, might have ties, transatlantic relations, and boost the trade. Maybe it's time to start talking about TTIP again.
Okay. Yeah, all right, you took it over. That's fine.
Just to add or to react, what you've described shows that trade liberalization and in general those 4 freedoms, we may backtrack on these freedoms, both between the blocks and inside the blocks, due to different reasons. And one watershed moment was the pandemics. What I've seen in Brussels, in the Commission, how much of state aid we agreed with was unthinkable before. So in the graphs there, we had only 2022, 2023, but if you go back before 2020, 21, much higher. So the pandemics distorted the whole level, the playing field in the EU, both because of pandemics per se, but also because of the reactions of the member states through state aid, through different ways. So it's one thing. The other reaction I wanted to have, it's on financial market. Because, it's not only time, political will, and skills, but it's also the perception of who is gaining what and who is risking what. And capital is different because it can flow very easily. So all countries take this into account while assessing the risks. And while in the EU, for certain countries, they may assess the risks low and actually to benefit, like, if you are center of gravity for financial markets, you may also always expect you would be a safe harbor if something happens. While for the countries far away or further away from gravity centers, they assess that the risks are too high. And some countries may have certain special problems, and the Polish banking sector is not free of problems. And the outcome is that this political will is pretty low. And in this respect, I would like to say that maybe small steps is a better idea. So doing, finding where this low-hanging fruits or where every actor can benefit and solving, small issues is a better way than, the capital market union, which was in the air in Brussels since 2015, and it's still in the air, and we can see it in Letta report, I think. So I don't know. From what I see is that rather small steps. Poland, for instance, well, as I mentioned to you, we are preparing the presidency, and there will be a number of trilogues. I will have to go to Brussels and represent the council, and it's always fixing something. So I would think that for capital markets is the best, is a way to move forward.
Mm-hmm. You have something to add, I guess, Marek.
Yes, going on what the minister said, I would say that we need also a sectoral approach here, because, for example, mentioned telecommunications sector, I here tend to disagree that we need more liberalization on this market. It's very well functioning market in the EU, very well functioned also for consumers. And here we cannot only view this, for example, companies' side. Consumers is also important. So between the EU and the US, it's not so big difference when it comes to what can companies achieve, and for sure when it comes to consumers, I wouldn't say satisfaction with what is being offered in Europe is quite huge. So we need to be careful in this approach. So we need the horizontal thinking, of course. So that we only do not focus on small steps or in our silos. So we need to go away from it. For example, economic security, the resilience of our supply chains is the issue that encompasses all different sectors and all actually kind of authorities in the government that need to cooperate. The same as was in the previous commission, we had a Green Deal that was the first priority, and we had the vice president for that. New commission most probably will have the vice president for economic security, for example. So this is what horizontal approach is needed, but then we also need to be very, very careful on the sectoral approach so that we do not risk something that is working very fine.
Mm-hmm. I have a question to Stephan, because obviously if we continue improving competitiveness, and we've spent a lot of time discussing various ways we could do that, obviously there's still a question of there's US, China, they're subsidizing their markets, they're imposing tariffs. The recent one in the US is kind of the best example against China, the one against EVs. The question is, I mean, how to best respond to those? I mean, what is the best way for the region such as Europe to respond to tariffs, to subsidies, when we have increased fragmentation generally in the global economy?
Generally, I don't think we opposed to subsidies per se. So subsidies have their role. They're clear reasons. If there is an externality and that's not captured, climate is one. I think there is a case for that. Research development, I think you spoke very clearly about there is a role for the public sector. There's of course the private sector too, but that makes sense. And even national security. So countries have the right and should be able to say, like, well, there's certain industries which are critical, so we want to have them and not entirely be dependent from other countries. So that, I think that's sort of the cases where we think it makes sense. Where we think it does not make sense is in a retaliatory fashion. So subsidies, if you were to impose them in order to create a stronger sector here or there. We did a study which will come out where we compared the performance in employment and sales of companies, and these are listed companies, that received state aid. And then we looked at what happened 6 to 12 months later. And those countries did employ more and grow more, and the competitors grew less and employed fewer. So it becomes a zero sum even within Europe. So I think it's not fair that others do it, but the best response is not to also imply subsidies, because it does not have the desired effects. What seems to work is, well, take advantage of the internal strength and make it more attractive that the investors who would otherwise produce something for export somewhere else finds it more attractive within Europe. And all you can do is make the level field more attractive by making it more interesting to invest, for example, in Poland or other countries.
If I may, only one, you mentioned national security on the last point, but from our point of view, it's, I would say, one of the first, right? Because the risk here is closer.
Yeah, I actually wanted to follow up with you on this, because you obviously talked quite a lot in your presentation about the sort of tension there between, you know, single market and the tariffs. I mean, do you sort of broadly agree with that sort of you know, view that it's, you know, if you increase the competitiveness of the single market, that should do any kind of target the subsidies properly?
So for sure, so if you hear, this is a very difficult task to have this balance between competition on the internal market and competitiveness of the companies working on it, and competitiveness of the European companies outside. So these are two different stories, I would say, as for energy prices, environmental standards, labor standards are in European Union very high. We can for sure quite easily defend our market against external competitors that are coming to internal market. But when it comes to what we are doing outside, here is the issue is more difficult, because, for example, the US is directing tariffs against China, so our competitive position on the US market can be better if we are not so targeted with sanctions or with tariffs. On the other hand, in other places in the third countries in the world, there might be no tariffs for Chinese EVs. So our manufactured EVs in Europe might be 50% more expensive than Chinese. So here there is a need for sure to think in this in these both ways, how we can secure our way. So actually, so maybe I will move a little back. I believe that there is a trilemma here. We have economic security issue that we need to have our manufacturing sites in Europe because of the supply chains that can be cut because of the policy risk or pandemic. We want to follow with our values and with the climate targets. So we need to think also about this. And there is the third point, the competitiveness issue. So if we try to follow economic security and our values, we are losing competitiveness. So maybe we need to choose different 2 points, for example, our standards and competitiveness, but then we might be losing our manufacturing side against more efficient sites in the world, and we lose our economic security, or even hard security as well. So here, this trilemma is where we need to have a pilot flying with this very strong crosswinds and choose what's the most important and try to strike the balance here. And it's very difficult, and for sure, application of all possible tools might be needed. Depending the single market, as well as some targeted tariffs, so like European Commission is doing with investigations against China's EVs, and subsidies so that European companies can also compete on the global market.
But such a reaction shouldn't forget about WTO. We are still under these rules. And the subsidies and direct subsidies are not so easy to implement. So we do have lots of such aims and the securities, let's say, but on the other hand side, there are some rules that we agreed to play with and to follow years ago. And moreover, in terms of the public aid and state funds, we shouldn't forget about the indebtedness, which many people forgot was directed as one of the major sources of crisis before pandemic started. In January 2020, I do remember the conference in a Polish central, it was actually in the Ministry of Finance, I do believe, presenting the World Bank report, the overlook and the macroeconomic outlook, for just a regular one, and there was a great capital letters, indebtedness, that would be a way for the next, the reason of the next crisis. Few weeks later, the situation has changed, but the problem didn't disappear. And moreover, we do have such a problem in terms of the debt service in countries like Poland, much stronger than the rest of Western Europe, because there is a security reason. The capital is less secure than the developed countries like France or Germany. We are not in the euro area, so this cost is much higher then. And actually, this service cost, the debt service, is one of the costs for the public funds, public spendings, next to defense, next to education and innovation, what we mentioned as one of the most important driver. And the health, which is also the key point in terms of aging, what we started the discussion.
Which I just realized we ran out of time a bit, right? And we just opened a lot of other topics, but I think I'll just open up the room for questions on that point. If anyone would like to touch on anything we've discussed here, please feel free to jump in.
Okay, that's fine. There was a recognition that deficits are quite high relative to the debt stabilizing level, and that there is a need that there's going to be several areas where spending has to increase from here. Where can the savings be found? You know, as we're financing military spending and a lot of critical things with additional debt. Where is there room for savings as we look out in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Would like to take this one? Not an easy question, I admit. Okay.
Well, it's a practical question, actually. But I understand it's not about savings as a private savings and actually something we would like to increase in the Polish society is to increase the saving rates of people. maybe we see something like this recently, as there are huge real wage increases, which don't fully translate into domestic demand, which actually it's a kind of disappointment for me as I look at the growth, quarterly growth rates. I would like to see much more increase of domestic demand. So I think you mean something different. You mean where we can make savings to lower public debt.
Or even just to stabilize it.
Yeah, or to stabilize. So one thing is the efficiency of the state. And we, as the Minister of Finance, we published so-called white book on public finance like a month ago, showing how intricate thickets of funds the public fund system became. And there are many leakages out of the system, and there are also many inefficiencies in the system. So one of the, and there's a huge degree of intransparency or not transparency. So one of the actions we foresee for the actually years to come, it's to simplify the system and to plug the holes and to look into the efficiency of the whole system. So it's one thing. The other thing is the efficiency of public spending. And again, what we've seen over the last years was centralization. And centralization goes against our constitutional rule of subsidiarity. So basically, the decisions were made at a very central level. And another thing we are, as a new government, we are doing and we plan to do is to decentralize, especially the money. Because previously, the tasks would be at the local level and the money would be decided somewhere up. Now we are changing the system for funding of local governments. They will get directly their funding through rules, not through artificial political decision. Then the horizon of the decision would be longer, and the decisions should be more efficient in this sense, less, more autonomous, less discretionary on political will of somebody. It's another area. Then the savings at some parts of public spending has to be found, which can be, implemented actually. But this depends also on the efficiency of our administration, and it's something I would say elephant in our discussion, that we would think that all the countries are the same, while the efficiency of administration is something I think heavily studied by the IMF, and countries differ. And it was during our conference on the 20 years of membership in the EU effects. For me, the main impact of the European funds in the Polish system is not the very funds themselves, but it's the system, how you run the projects. So you first you have to have an idea, then you have to provide some more or less scientific evidence. It's rational. Then you make a project with milestones, with horizons. Then you make, the whole system, and then at the end, after the project is fulfilled, you have to still provide evidence it was done, it was implemented. So the main role, for instance, of the Commission, and I participated in various committees, supervising the projects on both sides, actually. The main role of the Commission was that at the end, the Commission will come and they will ask for evidence. So we have to do it. While again, and we describe it in this white book, the system degenerated over the last years. So, there would be projects and then no follow-up. And then, the famous, the justice funds in Poland, there would be, the goals of this fund, and then the funds would be used for completely something different. So with the EU funds, it was unthinkable. In the system before, it was unthinkable. So it's another thing we will try to do as far as public funds are concerned, is to provide again the rules, the logic, the rationality in public spending.
Okay. I think we're wrapping up, right? It was great discussion, I think. I hope you really appreciate this well. So thanks a lot to our panelists, and hope to meet again. Thanks a lot.